is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen. Our top stories. Stepping up the pressure on world leaders, thousands of protesters on the streets in Brussels ahead of key climate talks. Our other headlines, the polls have closed in Iraq's general election, with turnout looking a lot lower than in previous years. And the Czech Prime Minister says he'll try to form a government, but all the opposition parties have more seats. Tens of thousands of people have marched through Brussels demanding urgent action on climate change. This comes ahead of the United Nations Climate Conference, COP26, which opens in Scotland in just under 3 weeks. Our correspondent Giles Gibson is in Brussels for us. Giles, quite a few groups taking part in this protest. Who's organised it and what are they calling for?
Well, Jamie, we've watched tens of thousands of people making their way slowly through the city centre of Brussels, starting off at the Gare du Nord in the north of the city, and then making their way past the headquarters of the European Commission, and then ending up in this park in the centre of the city. You can probably hear the music behind me, where really things are just starting to wind down at the end of the day. We've seen a completely broad spectrum of Belgian society throughout the day. We've seen young children with their families, we've seen students, we've seen adults, and we've also seen some retired couples just coming out on the streets and wanting to make their voices heard about climate change. Some of the groups who are responsible for organising this march have specific demands. There's a group such as the Climate Coalition, which is asking for the Belgian government to bring forward a Belgian Green New Deal, similar to the legislation that's been proposed in the US Congress in the United States. But a lot of the protesters we spoke to earlier really just wanted to send more general messages to their leaders at the national level as well as at the European level.
Just do what you know you have to do. I mean, everyone knows what has to be done, but it's not been done.
Well, I'm a grandmother, a mother, and I want my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and whatever generations in the future, anywhere in the world, to have a future. Because if we don't do anything now, there will not be a future.
Giles, I guess the pandemic has discouraged many people from taking part in demonstrations around the world, but we might now, I guess, see more people taking part, especially in the run-up to COP26.
Yeah, Jamie, and specifically here in Belgium, you've had quite strict lockdowns over the course of the pandemic, so people just really kept in their homes, and there's also been just caps on the numbers of people who are allowed to gather for things like this, for protests. Last month, of course, we saw this sweep of protests right across the world and right across Europe under the Fridays for Future umbrella. In particular, you had a massive rally in Berlin, the German capital, where the Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg gave another one of her fiery speeches. But on that day, you actually had, coincidentally, a transport strike taking place here in Brussels. So they didn't have a protest on that day when you saw protests in lots of different cities around the world. So this is really, Jamie, the first time that people here in Brussels and in the surrounding areas have had a chance for several years now, really, to make their voices heard about this massive issue about climate change. And of course, the timing is really important as well, because it's just 3 weeks to go until world leaders will gather in Glasgow in the United Kingdom for that crucial COP26 climate change conference.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you very much. In the last hour, the polls have closed across Iraq in the country's first parliamentary elections since mass protests over corruption, unemployment and poor services erupted in 2019. The old electoral system has been replaced with a new one designed to help independent candidates. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Owen Holdaway, who's in Baghdad for us. Owen, we're not going to know a result for many hours, I think. How did election day play out?
I mean, it was a very peaceful affair in terms of the overall voting. There was no real major incidents. I think the major take out at the moment is that the level of voting was extremely low. the participation rate, particularly for instance in the polling station which I was at in Karada in central Baghdad, was in its teens. I heard there were slightly higher levels of voting in some areas, particularly in sort of Sadr city and the outskirts of Baghdad. And again, a few friends of mine also told me up north in Kirkuk and those sort of areas, the polling rate was a little bit higher. But I think the main takeaway at the moment is just the fact that the large portion of the population, particularly the younger population, didn't actually participate. And being the fact that this part of the population was very much instrumental in calling for this election and behind the October protest movement that you mentioned in the introduction, the fact that they haven't participated really doesn't bode well for the future and the legitimacy of any government that comes out of this vote.
This vote, of course, was brought forward because of those protests. I wonder, will that have influenced how people voted?
I think it very much has. I mean, I think in terms of there was a boycott particularly amongst the southern Shia groups that generally didn't feel that the voting, although there was some redistricting and the fact that it was trying to empower some more independent candidates. I think the fact that the participation rate was so low, particularly in Baghdad and the south, showed that they really did not feel that there was a big enough change coming from these groups. That being said, previously I was up north in Mosul, and like some of the candidates there were very much getting forefront, and some of the voters there were really excited about the fact that they were able to vote, and the fact that some of the candidates weren't so beholden to the so-called party blocs. I think another thing to take away as well is the fact that although whatever government does come out, there's a large swathe of women who've taken place and candidates. So I think there is a lot of the parliament that will come out of this, I think, will be viewed as a progressive, whether or not it has legitimacy in the eyes of the protesters and their demands, particularly to tackling the issues of corruption and sectarianism that has plagued this country since the fall of Saddam and the US invasion of 2003, will remain to be seen.
Owen, we shall no doubt talk to you in coming hours when we have a final result. But for the moment, thank you very much. Owen Holdaway there for us in Baghdad. The Czech Prime Minister, Andrej Babiš, looks set to lose power by the narrowest of margins after an upset in the general election there. The vote was held just after the billionaire was named in the Pandora Papers for his financial dealings. Meanwhile, the country's president, Miloš Zeman, has been rushed to hospital over an undisclosed condition. He was due to lead the political talks on the formation of the next government. Nicole Johnson's report contains flash photography.
Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Andrej Babiš, a man who once compared himself to former US President Donald Trump, has been narrowly defeated in parliamentary elections. Results indicate Babiš's centrist party has lost by less than a percentage point. The Liberal-Conservative three-party coalition called Spolo, meaning together, is ahead. And along with a separate alliance of parties called Pirates and Mayors, the two coalitions appear to hold 108 of 200 parliamentary seats.
The two democratic coalitions have a majority in Parliament. And they have a chance to form a majority government. This is the change. We are the change. You are the change.
The Together Alliance and Pirates and Mayors now say they will join forces to form a majority alliance in the new Czech government.
I think the shared win of these two coalitions is a direct result of the behavior of Prime Minister Andrej Babiš during the whole election campaign.
But the result is still far from clear-cut. Before the election, the president, Miloš Zeman, said Babiš would be given the first chance to form government even if the coalition won more votes.
The president says he will authorise the strongest party. If he authorises me to do so, I will discuss forming a cabinet.
Now Zeman has been rushed to hospital. Regardless, the potential defeat of Andrej Babiš could signal that Central Europe's populist wave is waning. He was known for his anti-immigrant rhetoric. His ad campaign said he would, quote, fight until my dying breath against immigration. And he allied himself with Hungary's nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban, rallying against the European Union. Now the Czech public has had their chance at the polls to make a change. And despite the close result, Andrej Babis's time may be up. Nicole Johnston, CGTN.
At least 16 people have died and 6 injured in a plane crash in the Russian region of Tatarstan. The twin-engine short-range transport aircraft was carrying 22 parachutists from a club that provides assistance to the armed forces. The health ministry says 6 survivors are in a critical condition. Thousands of people have been taking part in rallies in Poland in support of the European Union and the country's membership of the EU. Last week, Poland's top court issued a landmark ruling against the primacy of EU law. The demonstrations have been called by the former EU chief, Donald Tusk, who's now leader of the country's main opposition group. Italy has reached its target of fully vaccinating 80% of the population over the age of 12 against COVID-19. The target was set in March in the hope that the rollout programme would help reduce hospitalisation and help the country's care system to refocus on other health services. There's been violence in Tunisia between the police and protesters demonstrating against the president, Kais Saied. In July, he dismissed the Prime Minister, suspended Parliament and assumed executive authority in moves critics have described as a coup. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead here on The World Today, our disappearing wildlife and what it could mean for mankind. China hosts the world's big gathering on biodiversity.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Tens of thousands of protesters gather on the streets of Brussels to keep the pressure on world leaders ahead of key climate talks. The polls have closed in Iraq's general election, with turnout looking a lot lower than in previous years. And the Czech Prime Minister says he'll try to form a government despite election results that have left him short of a majority. Austria's Chancellor Sebastian Kurz has stepped down after mounting pressure over a corruption scandal. He and 9 others have been placed under investigation after raids at a number of locations linked to his Conservative People's Party. He's denied claims that he used government money to ensure positive coverage in a newspaper. Johannes Plešberger reports now from Vienna.
For many, it came as a surprise when Chancellor Sebastian Kurz announced his resignation on Saturday evening. Fellow party member and Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg is to take over the post, at least until corruption investigations against Conservative Party leader Kurz are concluded. The 35-year-old still insists that he had nothing to do with alleged payments to a newspaper for favorable coverage. But his resignation heads off a crisis in the government.
In this difficult time, it should never be about personal or party interests or political tactics. because my country is more important to me than myself. And what we need now are stable conditions. I would therefore like to make way in order to end the stalemate, to prevent chaos and to ensure stability.
Kurz's replacement was a condition imposed by his Green coalition partner for the continuation of the government. Initially, Kurz's Conservative Party refused, but after 3 days of government standstill, many party members apparently changed their minds. But Sebastian Kurz will keep a hold on power regardless. Schallenberg is a close ally who takes the same line as his party leader on most issues. For foreign policy, this means a harsh line on taking in refugees and intensive efforts for EU enlargement in the Western Balkans. Many political analysts see this resignation as a tactical maneuver. Schallenberg is not likely to do anything Kurz does not agree with, and Kurz may well return as Chancellor, depending on the outcome of the investigations. Johannes Blechberger, CGTN, Vienna.
The coming weeks will be critical in determining the future of the Iran nuclear deal between Tehran and a number of world powers. That's according to the outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She's been in Jerusalem on a final visit to Israel as Germany's leader. CGTN's Stephanie Fried reports.
The longer Tehran fails to respond to U.S. overtures, the more uranium Iran will enrich. In her statement to press in Jerusalem, German Chancellor Angela Merkel urged Iranian leaders to come back to the nuclear deal negotiating table.
It's not about being neutral, but to take a clear stand towards Israel's security, no matter how difficult the situation.
Merkel's Israel visit is mostly symbolic, meant to send a message of continued German support for and commitment to Israel beyond Merkel's current tenure. The German chancellor's visit comes at a critical time.
Iran's nuclear program has reached a stage that necessitates leadership. Acceptance of Iran's transformation to a country on the verge of nuclear capability will constitute a moral stain on the free world and will threaten global well-being.
The U.S. has been looking to Tehran's leaders for signs of willingness around negotiating a return to a 2015 nuclear deal that would curb Iran's nuclear program. Those signs have not been forthcoming. On Sunday, both Bennett and Merkel said the coming weeks vis-à-vis Iran will be decisive. Merkel's Israel visit coincides with reports from Tehran's nuclear chief that Iran has produced 120 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium. According to the 2015 nuclear deal, uranium was only meant to be enriched to 3.67%. That deal was scrapped in 2018 by former U.S. President Donald Trump. 90% enriched uranium is the threshold for a nuclear weapon. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
The UK government says more than 1,100 migrants managed to cross the English Channel from France in the last 2 days. At least 40 boats made the journey, while French coastguards managed to stop several others. Nearly 4,000 people crossed to the UK in September, the highest monthly total on record. Lebanon's power supplies are back to normal after the country's two biggest power stations shut down because of a fuel shortage. The Energy Ministry announced it had received central bank approval for $100 million in credit to issue fuel import tenders for electricity generation. The economic crisis in Lebanon has deepened as supplies of imported fuel have run out. Molten lava has been flowing out of the volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma, which has been erupting since the 19th of September. So far, its rivers of magma have destroyed more than 1,000 properties and forced nearly 6,000 people to flee their homes. In China's Shanxi province, more than 120,000 people have been forced to relocate following devastating flooding. The emergency services have been helping people to get to safety, while infrastructure workers rush to restore vital transport links. Chuck Tinte has the story.
Dams washed away, villages inundated, people trapped. Intense rain and flooding have been wreaking havoc in the northern province all week.
The Hejin section of the Funhe River, a major branch of the Yellow River, has experienced water levels not seen in nearly 40 years. Violent river flows caused a dike to burst on Friday morning, forcing many to flee. Authorities have been moving to repair the damage and find shelters for the displaced. A major community effort is in play as locals work with professional teams to fight the floods.
We have gone all out to deploy all kinds of emergency supplies, including equipment and vehicles, and mobilize professional and non-professional forces from various communities to fully participate in the rescue efforts.
Key railway lines have been affected too. On Wednesday, bridge abutments were washed away with the tracks on the bridge destroyed. A major problem ahead of the winter for one of the country's major coal-producing provinces. Tons of coals could not be transported out, but as ever, it was a major effort to repair the damage. On Friday night, the uplink railway of the bridge was reopened to traffic. And even the province's cultural treasures haven't been spared. Heavy rain eroded sections of the walls of the Pingyao ancient city, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with a history dating back some 2,700 years. Cultural heritage protection experts are on the scene, working to repair the damage. Chuck Tintis, CGTN.
The loss of wildlife habitats threatens human survival. That's the blunt warning from the United Nations Biodiversity Conference opening in the Chinese city of Kunming. COP15 comes just weeks ahead of the Global Climate Conference in Glasgow. Yang Jinghao reports.
I'm here in the venue where the conference is going to take place. Due to the pandemic, the conference will be convened in two phases. The first segment will run from Monday to Friday. Most of the international guests will be taking part virtually. And the second part is scheduled for next spring, also in the city of Kunming. The opening ceremony is going to take place on Monday afternoon, Beijing time. The senior Chinese leader will deliver a keynote speech, followed by remarks by representatives from other parts of the world. During the high-level meetings, ministers from some 100 countries and officials of major international organizations will brainstorm how to promote harmony between man and nature. A declaration will be issued following to call on all parties to act to build a shared future for all life on Earth. In the last 2 days, several forums will be held under diverse themes, such as climate change and biodiversity, and how financial institutions can support biodiversity protection. Scientists have warned the diversity of life on Earth is declining faster than ever. Against this backdrop, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity says the conference is a great opportunity for global stakeholders to make commitments and reach consensus on coordinated and viable actions towards the goal of making peace with nature.
We have to develop this post-2020 global biodiversity framework that will provide a roadmap for these changes, these transformational changes. And we have to be ready to implement this global biodiversity framework, this roadmap, very quickly.
During the past decades, China's been active in the implementation of the convention. As the host country, China is expected to share its experience in ecological protection with its global partners. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Kunming, Yunnan Province.
The UK is lagging behind its European neighbours on environmental legislation involving single-use plastics. Campaigners are calling on the government to implement a ban on plastic cutlery and other single-use items which are causing harm to wildlife and humans. Kitty Logan reports now from Stroud in England.
Food, only a few clicks away, a full meal or a special treat, delivered to the door within half an hour. But with takeaways can come plastic cutlery and plates. This delivery company has an opt-out to cut down on plastic waste, making a takeaway order more sustainable and almost guilt-free.
someone who does it a bit.
But environmental campaigners say too many businesses still offer single-use plastic cutlery, and they're calling for a UK-wide ban.
You need individuals, you need businesses, and you need politics all coming together to make a real difference.
A change in the law would bring the UK into line with the European Union. EU member states banned several types of single-use plastics, including cutlery and plates, from July. But since Brexit, Britain no longer has to follow the same EU guidelines.
So what we're seeing now is that the UK is falling behind the rest of Europe. All across Europe there's legislation coming in, and what we've seen in the UK is being slow off the mark and slow on the uptake of this really important environmental legislation.
The sleepy market town of Stroud is home to several independent cafes. Most here have swapped out single-use plastics, dishing up takeaways in cardboard containers.
Of course, since the start of the pandemic, the trend for takeaways has really taken off. With that comes, naturally, disposable cutlery. But what campaigners would like us to do now is to think a lot more carefully about the type of cutlery we take away with us.
Even a busy Prime Minister is tempted by convenience. And many takeaways and pre-packaged meals are sold with plastic cutlery included, leaving the consumer with little choice. And perhaps little time for careful disposal. Many plastic waste items are littered, then washed away by rain, ending up in rivers and seas, causing long-term harm to wildlife and humans.
When the consumer does the right thing and puts items in their bin or in their recycling boxes, we know that these waste streams don't always end up where they should be. In fact, we think that as little as 9% of the plastic ever produced has been recycled.
The government says it is tackling the plastic problem, with plans to improve recycling systems. A ban on some single-use plastics, such as straws and stirrers, is already in place. It's now launching a public consultation which could lead to that ultimate ban on plastic plates and cutlery too. Campaigners say a change in the law can't come soon enough to prevent further harm to the environment. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Stroud.
Britain's Tyson Fury has declared himself the greatest heavyweight boxer of his generation after landing a knockout punch on his opponent Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. Fury retained his World Boxing Council title in the 11th round of a clash that took a mental and physical toll on both men. Fury has now won 2 of the 3 fights between them, and Wilder, the other bout, was a draw. The headlines again. Tens of thousands of protesters have been gathering in the streets of Brussels to keep the pressure on world leaders ahead of key global climate talks. Polls have closed in Iraq's general election, with turnout looking a lot lower than in previous years. And the Czech Prime Minister says he will try to form a government despite election results that have left him short of a majority. And that's it for The World Today. Thank you for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and on the CGTN app. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Razor. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.